When I asked what time the wedding dinner was, my daughter replied, "Oh, we had it yesterday just for close family." A month later, she called me in a panic, screaming, "The card didn't go through. Did you forget to pay the bill, Mom? Please fix it quickly." I responded, "Didn't I warn you?" Before I begin, I just want to say thank you for taking the time to hear my story. If you're comfortable, let me know where you're listening from and what time it is where you are. My name is Sarah Jenkins. For 30 years, I built an empire with a pair of scissors and a business plan. This is the story of how I learned that the most important investment you can ever make is in your own self-respect, especially when your own child tries to sell it for a place at a fancier table. The day of my daughter's wedding was, against all odds, perfect. The sun shone with a benevolent late June warmth, the kind that makes every color seem richer, every sound clearer. The ceremony was held in the sprawling, manicured gardens of the Sterling estate, a place of such breathtaking old-world beauty that it seemed to exist outside of time. Roses, the color of cream and blush, climbed ancient stone walls. A string quartet played softly from beneath the shade of a massive 300-year-old oak tree. I sat in the front row, a place of honor that felt more like a cage, and I watched my daughter, my Jasmine, become a wife. My heart was a complicated, warring territory of emotions. There was a deep maternal pride, so profound it was a physical ache in my chest. She was a vision, a princess from a fairy tale in a dress of white silk and antique lace that had cost more than my first car. Her smile, as she looked at her new husband, Evan, was radiant, a genuine, unforced joy that I had not seen on her face in a very long time. And for that I was grateful. But beneath the pride, beneath the love, there was a deep, gnawing sorrow, a sense of loss so total that it felt like a kind of death. I was not just losing a daughter to a husband, I was losing her to a world that had deemed me and the life I had built unworthy. The cocktail hour that followed was a masterclass in performative elegance. Waiters in crisp white jackets moved silently through the crowd, offering champagne and canapés so small they seemed to evaporate on the tongue. The guests, a collection of the city's oldest and wealthiest families, spoke in the low, confident murmurs of people who had never had to raise their voices to be heard. I moved through the throng, a ghost in a lavender silk dress, offering polite smiles and accepting congratulations that felt hollow, unearned. I was the mother of the bride, but I felt like an imposter, a tradeswoman who had accidentally wandered into the grand ballroom of the palace. I finally found Jasmine holding court near the string quartet, surrounded by her new Sterling-approved friends. She was glowing, basking in the warm, adoring light of her new status. I waited for a pause in the conversation, a small opening in the fortress of her new life, and I approached, my own heart a nervous, fluttering bird in my chest. "Sweetie," I said, my voice sounding a little too bright, a little too eager. It was a beautiful ceremony. Just perfect. "Thanks, Mom," she said, her smile a brief, dismissive flash in my direction before her eyes darted away, already scanning the crowd for someone more important, more interesting. "I was just wondering," I said, my voice dropping, trying to sound casual, conspiratorial, like a mother sharing a secret with her daughter on her wedding day. "What time should we head to the restaurant for the dinner? I didn't want to be late." I was speaking, of course, of the intimate family dinner, the sacred, traditional meal shared between the two families after the public ceremony, the moment where the two clans officially and privately become one. It was the part of the day I had clung to, a small, hopeful beacon in a sea of social anxiety. It was the moment, I had told myself, where we would be a family, away from the prying eyes and the quiet judgments of the Sterling's world. Jasmine turned to me, her expression a blank, uncomprehending slate. "The dinner," she repeated, the words flat, empty, as if I had just asked her a question in a foreign language. "Yes," I said, my own smile beginning to feel stiff, painted on. "The family dinner. You never told me what time it was or where we were going." And then she delivered the blow. It was not a shout. It was not a confrontation. It was a quiet, casual, and utterly devastating act of social violence, delivered with the effortless grace of a seasoned executioner. She did not even have the decency to look me in the eye. Her gaze was fixed over my shoulder on her new mother-in-law, Isabel, who was gliding toward us, a serene, triumphant smile on her perfectly made-up face. "Oh," Jasmine said, her voice a wave of airy, dismissive nonchalance, the voice of someone discussing a minor, forgotten detail. "We had it yesterday. It was just for close family." The world stopped. The music of the string quartet, the laughter of the guests, the warm, benevolent sun, all of it vanished, replaced by a cold, silent, and terrifying void. Close family. The words echoed in the sudden roaring silence of my own mind. I, her mother, the woman who had given her life, the woman who had built an empire to fund her every dream, was not, in the new brutal calculus of her social ambition, considered close family. I was the outlaw, the embarrassing working-class appendage that had been surgically and secretly removed from the new perfect sterling family portrait. I saw Isabel's eyes as she reached us, the flicker of cold, reptilian satisfaction. This was her masterpiece. This was the final brutal checkmate in her quiet, vicious game. She had not just won my daughter, she had successfully and publicly erased me. I stood there in the middle of that perfect sun-drenched garden, and I felt a coldness spread through me that was so profound, so absolute, that it seemed to freeze the very air in my lungs. The warning I had given her, the line I had drawn in the sand, was a distant, foolish memory. She had not just crossed it, she had bulldozed it, and she had built a new, impenetrable fortress on the other side, a fortress where I was not welcome. I did not cause a scene. I did not scream. I did not cry. My capacity for all of those things seemed to have been instantly and permanently cauterized. The pain was so immense, so total, that it was beyond any normal human expression. It was a quiet internal supernova, a collapsing of a star that left nothing behind but a cold, dark, and terrifying void. I looked at my daughter, my beautiful, cruel, and utterly alien daughter, and I smiled. It was a brittle, terrible smile, a rictus of a thing that did not touch my eyes. "Oh," I said, my voice a strange, high-pitched sound that seemed to belong to someone else. "I see. Well, you two have a wonderful life together." And then I turned. I did not wait for her reply. I did not spare a single glance for Isabel's triumphant, reptilian face. I simply turned and I walked away. I moved through the crowd, a ghost in a lavender silk dress, and no one seemed to notice my departure. I was an irrelevance, a footnote in the grand, important story of the Sterling family wedding. I found my purse, handed my valet ticket to a young man with kind eyes, and I left. The drive home was a long, silent journey through a world that had suddenly lost all of its color. I was on autopilot, my hands gripping the steering wheel, my eyes fixed on the road, but my mind was a blank, white, roaring static. I was not thinking. I was not feeling. I was simply erased. When I finally pulled into my own driveway, the familiar sight of my own home, the sanctuary I had built for myself and my daughter, offered no comfort. It was just a house, a collection of objects, a stage set for a life that was no longer real. I sat in the car, in the quiet, familiar darkness of my own garage, and I finally allowed myself to feel. But it was not the grief, the sorrow, the heartbroken anguish I had expected. It was something else. It was a cold, clean, and deeply, deeply clarifying rage. It was the rage of a woman who had given everything and had been repaid with the ultimate betrayal. It was the rage of a woman who had been underestimated, disrespected, and discarded. It was the rage of a woman who had been pushed too far. The warning I had given Jasmine, the one she had so casually and arrogantly dismissed, was no longer just a memory. It was a promise. A promise I was now, with a cold and terrible and deeply satisfying resolve, about to keep. The time for love, for sacrifice, for endless, unconditional generosity was over. The time for consequences had just begun. My first call was to my sister, Karen. She was my opposite in almost every way. Pragmatic where I was sentimental, sharp-tongued where I was diplomatic, a realist to my eternal optimist. She was a high school principal, a woman who had spent 40 years dealing with the drama and deceit of teenagers, and she had a built-in foolproof detector for nonsense. She had been telling me for years that I was spoiling Jasmine, that my open-handed generosity was a crutch, not a gift. I had always dismissed her concerns as the cynical ramblings of a childless woman who didn't understand the depth of a mother's love. She had, of course, been right all along. I called her from the car, my voice a low, flat, and chillingly calm monotone. I told her what had happened, not with the tears and the anguish of a victim, but with the cold, precise language of a witness reporting a crime. I recounted Jasmine's words, the casual, airy dismissal, the brutal finality of just for close family. The silence on the other end of the line was not the silence of shock. It was the silence of a long, weary, and deeply sad vindication. When she finally spoke, her voice was not filled with pity. It was filled with a pure, undiluted, and deeply satisfying fury. She didn't, Karen hissed, her voice a low, dangerous growl. Sarah, tell me she did not do that to you. On her wedding day. She did, I said, my own voice a dead, empty thing. That ungrateful, social-climbing little monster, she spat, the words a volley of pure, righteous rage. After everything you've done for her. After the life you have given her. To cut you out, to publicly humiliate you for what? To impress that ice queen of a mother-in-law? I told you, Sarah. I told you for years this was coming. You gave her a blank check and she just used it to write you out of her life. Her anger, her fierce, unwavering, and completely unapologetic anger on my behalf, was the first warm thing I had felt in hours. It was a validation, a confirmation that I was not overreacting, that the betrayal was as monstrous, as unforgivable as it felt. So, she said, her voice shifting, becoming sharp, strategic, the voice of the principal who was about to bring the full weight of the disciplinary code down on a particularly recalcitrant student. What are you going to do about it? I don't know, I whispered, the cold calm beginning to falter, the pain beginning to seep back in. Yes, you do, she said, her voice a firm, unwavering command. You are going to do exactly what you told her you would do. You drew a line in the sand, Sarah. You gave her a warning. She chose to step over it. If you do nothing now, you are telling her that your words are meaningless, that your respect is worthless, that she can treat you like dirt and the checks will just keep coming. You cannot let that happen. You owe it to yourself. You owe it to the memory of every 16-hour day you ever worked to give her that life. He was right. She was absolutely, brutally, and beautifully right. Call Marcus Thorne, she said, her voice now a quiet, insistent order. Your financial advisor. Call him first thing in the morning. And you tell him to cut her off. Completely. The credit card, the rent, the car payments, all of it. You turn off the tap, Sarah. And you do it now. Not tomorrow. Not next week. No. Let her find out on her 5-star luxury honeymoon what the real world feels like. Let her find out what her new close family is willing to pay for. Her words were a cold, bracing slap in the face. A shock to my system that cleared away the fog of pain and replaced it with a hard, sharp, and deeply empowering resolve. The time for being a mother was over. It was time to be a CEO. It was time to balance the books. You're right, I said, my own voice now a reflection of hers, cold, steady, and resolute. I know I'm right, she said, her voice softening with a fierce, protective love. You are the strongest woman I know, Sarah Jenkins. You built an empire from nothing. Don't you dare let that spoiled little girl and her snobbish new family make you forget who you are. You are not the mother-in-law they have to tolerate. You are the woman who could buy and sell them 10 times over. It's time you reminded them of that. I hung up the phone, my heart a steady, powerful drum in my chest. My sister had not just given me advice, she had given me a mirror. She had shown me not the heartbroken, discarded mother, but the powerful, successful, and deeply wronged woman I was. And that woman was now finally ready to go to war. That night, sleep was a stranger. I wandered the quiet, familiar rooms of my home, a ghost in my own life. Every object, every photograph, seemed to mock me with a memory of a love I now knew to be a lie. There was Jasmine's first-grade picture on the mantelpiece, her gap-toothed smile a painful reminder of a simpler, more innocent time. There was the framed art history poster from her semester abroad in Florence, a trip I had worked double shifts to pay for. The house was a museum of my own foolish, one-sided devotion. I thought of my late husband, of the dreams we had shared for our daughter. He had been a simple man, a plumber who had worked with his hands, but he had a deep, quiet wisdom. He had seen the streak of selfishness in Jasmine even as a child and had warned me against spoiling her. Love isn't about giving them everything they want, Sarah, he'd say. It's about teaching them the value of what they have. I had dismissed his concerns as the worries of a man who didn't understand the fierce, all-encompassing nature of a mother's love. He had, of course, been right. As the first gray light of dawn began to creep through the windows, I found myself in my home office, the nerve center of my small empire. I sat at my desk, the place where I had built my future, and I thought about the warning I had given my daughter. It replayed in my mind not as a memory but as a premonition, a prophecy that had now, with a brutal, terrible finality, come true. The memory was so vivid, so clear, it felt like it was happening all over again. We were at lunch just a few weeks before the wedding at a quiet, neutral restaurant I had chosen specifically for this conversation. The tension between us had been building for months, a low humming current of resentment and disapproval. I had finally decided that I could no longer remain silent. Jasmine, I had begun, my voice calm, but with an underlying edge of steel she had never heard from me before. We need to be very clear about something. My love for you is and always will be unconditional. But my financial support is not. She had looked at me, a flicker of surprised, annoyed confusion in her eyes. She had been in the middle of describing the ridiculously expensive floral arrangements Isabel had insisted upon, and my interruption had clearly irritated her. My money, I had continued, my voice low and steady, the money that pays for your apartment, your car, and your life, is not an inheritance you are owed. It is a gift. And it is a gift that is predicated on a foundation of mutual love and respect. I have worked my entire life to build a legacy of integrity, of pride, of community. And I will not stand by and watch you, my own daughter, disrespect that legacy or me, in order to impress a woman who looks down on us. I had leaned forward then, my gaze unwavering, forcing her to meet my eyes. So here is my warning. If you ever, in a fundamental way, disrespect me, my friends, my life, or the family I have built, that financial support will end. The credit card will be cancelled. The rent will no longer be paid. I'm not a bank, Jasmine. I am your mother. And my support is not something you can take for granted. Do you understand me? She had stared at me for a long, silent moment, her mouth slightly agape. And then she had done something that had broken my heart all over again. She had laughed. It was not a real laugh, but a short, brittle, and deeply dismissive sound, a sound that had told me everything I needed to know. "Oh, Mom," she had said, shaking her head as if I were a silly, hysterical child who had just thrown a tantrum. "You're being so dramatic. Of course I respect you. I love you. But you have to understand the Sterlings are just different. It's a different world with different rules. I'm just trying to navigate it. You don't have to worry. Everything is fine." She hadn't understood. She hadn't heard the warning. She had heard only a mother's dramatic, emotional outburst. She was so insulated by her own entitlement, so certain of her place in my world, that she could not comprehend the possibility that it could ever be taken away from her. She had patted my hand, a gesture of patronizing reassurance, and had immediately changed the subject back to the color of the bridesmaids' dresses. Now, sitting in the quiet pre-dawn stillness of my office, the memory of her laughter, of her casual, arrogant dismissal, was a hot, bitter coal in the center of my chest. She had not just ignored my warning, she had mocked it. She had looked at the line I had drawn in the sand, and she had laughed as she had danced across it. The sun was fully up now, its bright, unforgiving light flooding my office. The period of mourning, of reflection was over. It was a new day. It was my Independence Day. And it was time to make some calls. The next morning, I walked into the hushed, elegant offices of my financial advisor, Marcus Thorne, not as a client but as a commander-in-chief. Marcus was a sharp, impeccably dressed man in his mid-40s, a man who had managed my personal and business wealth for over a decade. He was a brilliant financial strategist, a man who understood the intricate dance of numbers and the cold, hard logic of the bottom line. He was also a friend, a man who had a deep and quiet respect for the empire I had built. And he had for years watched Jasmine's extravagant, relentless spending with the silent, professional disapproval of a man who knew he was witnessing a slow-motion train wreck. I had called him the night before and scheduled an emergency first thing in the morning meeting. He met me in the lobby, his expression a mask of calm, professional concern. He knew from the tone of my voice on the phone that this was not a routine portfolio review. He led me to his private office, a beautiful, light-filled room with a panoramic view of the city. He closed the door and I sat down in one of the plush leather chairs opposite his massive, polished desk. "Sarah," he began, his voice a gentle, respectful murmur. "What's happened?" I did not cry. I did not rage. I simply and calmly laid out the facts. I told him about the wedding, about the secret dinner, about the final, brutal dismissal. I told him about the warning I had given my daughter, and about her casual, arrogant disregard for it. I was not a mother telling a story of heartbreak. I was a CEO reporting a fundamental breach of contract. He listened, his expression unchanging, his gaze steady and focused. He was a man accustomed to dealing with the messy, emotional fallout of family fortunes, and he knew that his role was not to be a therapist but a surgeon. When I was finished, he was silent for a long moment, his fingers steepled under his chin. "I see," he finally said, his voice a low, quiet rumble. "I am so sorry you had to experience that, Sarah. It is an unconscionable act of disrespect." He paused, and his expression shifted, the sympathetic friend receding, the sharp, lethal financial advisor coming to the fore. "So," he said, his voice now crisp, all business. "What are your instructions?" My instructions were simple, direct, and absolute. "I want you to remove Jasmine Carter as an authorized user from all of my accounts," I said, my voice as cold and as hard as the marble floor beneath my feet. "I want you to cancel her supplementary credit card. I want you to halt all automatic payments for her rent and her car. I want you to sever every single financial tie between myself and my daughter. And I want you to do it now. Today. Effective immediately." He did not flinch. He did not question my decision. He did not urge me to reconsider. He simply nodded, a single sharp and deeply satisfying motion. "Of course, Sarah," he said, his voice the epitome of professional efficiency. He swiveled in his chair and typed a series of commands into his computer. "I am freezing the credit card account as we speak. The cancellation will be processed by the end of the day. I will contact the bank and the relevant landlords and leasing companies this morning to halt all future payments." He turned back to me, his face a mask of calm, professional resolve. "It's done," he said. It was that simple. A few keystrokes, a few phone calls, and a 30-year history of unconditional financial support was over. The tap had been turned off. The safety net had been removed. The blank check had been voided. "She's on her honeymoon, you know," I said, the first small and deeply satisfying flicker of a bitter smile touching my lips. "They're in Europe for a month. Paris, Rome, the Amalfi Coast. All on my credit card, of course." A slow, appreciative smile spread across Marcus's own face. He was a man who understood the beautiful, intricate mechanics of a perfectly executed financial maneuver. "Indeed," he said, his eyes glinting with a cold, professional amusement. "The chargebacks from the hotels and restaurants should begin to hit her own accounts in a day or two. I imagine her honeymoon is about to become significantly more complicated." We both knew what was about to happen. The charges for her lavish, extravagant trip, which had been flowing so freely and so easily onto my account, were about to be declined. The massive hotel bills, the designer shopping sprees, the Michelin-starred dinners, all of it was about to come crashing down on her head. She was a world away, living in a beautiful, luxurious fantasy, a fantasy that was, as of this moment, no longer being funded. The trap was set. The fuse was lit. And all I had to do now was wait for the inevitable, glorious, and very, very expensive explosion. I walked out of Marcus's office that morning feeling not the pain of a mother who had just disowned her child, but the clean, cold, and deeply empowering satisfaction of a CEO who had just divested herself of a toxic and underperforming asset. My next stop that morning was my lawyer's office. I needed to do more than just cut off the cash flow. I needed to legally and permanently protect my empire, my legacy, from the daughter who had just declared herself its enemy. I needed to change my will. My current will was a simple, straightforward document drafted years ago in a more innocent time. It left the entirety of my estate, the salons, my real estate holdings, my personal investments, everything, to my only child, Jasmine. It was a mother's will, a document born of love, of hope, of the naive and unquestioned assumption that my daughter would be the loving, responsible steward of the world I had built for her. That woman and that will were now dead. I sat in the quiet, book-lined office of my lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman who had been a friend for 20 years, and I laid out my new vision for the future. "I want to change everything," I said, my voice clear and resolute. "I want to remove Jasmine as the beneficiary of my estate. Completely and irrevocably." My lawyer, a woman who was not easily shocked, raised an eyebrow. "Completely?" she asked. "Completely," I confirmed. "She has made her choice. Now I am making mine." I then explained my new plan, an idea that had been slowly and beautifully taking shape in my mind since the wedding. I was not just going to disinherit my daughter. I was going to create a new heir, a new legacy, one that was worthy of the work and the values I had poured my life into. I want to establish a foundation, I said, the words feeling more right, more true than anything I had said in years. It will be called the Genesis Grant. And its mission will be to provide startup funding, mentorship, and business education to women in my community who, like me, have a dream of starting their own business. I want to use my money to empower a new generation of female entrepreneurs. I want to build a legacy of strength, of independence, of community. My lawyer listened, a slow, appreciative smile spreading across her face. That, she said, her voice filled with a genuine and deeply satisfying respect, is the most elegant and most devastating act of revenge I have ever heard of. It's brilliant, Sarah. Absolutely brilliant. We spent the next 2 hours drafting the charter for the new foundation, outlining its mission, its structure, its board of directors. It was the most creative, most exciting, and most meaningful work I had done in years. I was not just protecting my assets, I was transforming them. I was taking the fruits of my own success and planting a new garden, a garden that would bear fruit for generations of women to come. By the time I left her office, the legal framework for my new life was in place. The will was being redrafted. The foundation was being incorporated. The future of my empire was secure. And it was a future that did not include my daughter. I had closed her account not just at the bank but in the ledger of my own life. The month that followed was a period of strange and deeply liberating quiet. The constant low-grade hum of my daughter's needs, which had been the background noise of my entire adult life, was gone. There were no more panicked calls about rent, no more passive-aggressive texts about car payments, no more extravagant credit card bills to be paid. The silence was, at first, a little unnerving. And then it became peace. I poured myself into my work with a renewed and joyful focus. I began to see my salons not as a means to an end, not as a machine for generating the money that funded my daughter's life, but as my own personal creative expression. I spent more time on the floor talking to clients, mentoring my young stylists. I started sketching out ideas for a new line of hair care products, a project I had put on the back burner for years. My business, which had for so long been a vehicle for my daughter's dreams, was now once again the vehicle for my own. And it was thrilling. I reconnected with my friends, the loud, flashy, and wonderfully loyal women my daughter had been so ashamed of. We had long, leisurely dinners, we went to the theater, we took a weekend trip to a spa. We laughed, we talked, we celebrated our shared history, our shared success. I was reminded, in the most beautiful and profound way, that the family you choose is often more real, more supportive, and more loving than the family you are given. And all the while, I knew that a world away, a storm was gathering. The reports from Marcus Thorne were a source of quiet and deeply satisfying amusement. The cancelled credit card, through some bizarre and beautiful quirk of the international banking system, had continued to work for 2 glorious and deeply ironic weeks. The cancellation was in the system, but it had not yet caught up to them. And so, they were living on borrowed time and borrowed money, racking up a bill of truly epic proportions. I saw the charges as they came in, a real-time travelogue of their oblivious, entitled journey. There was a $5,000 shopping spree at a designer boutique in Paris. A $10,000 hotel bill from a 5-star resort on the Amalfi Coast. A series of Michelin-starred dinners, each one costing more than my monthly grocery bill. They were burning through my money with a reckless, frantic abandon, a final, spectacular fireworks display of their own arrogance. I imagined them clinking champagne glasses in a rooftop bar overlooking the Colosseum, laughing, celebrating their new, sophisticated life. A life they believed they had successfully purchased with their social maneuvering. I imagined them mocking me, my tacky friends, my little shop, feeling so smug, so superior, so certain that they had gotten away with it. They had no idea that they were not on vacation. They were on a timer. And the clock was about to run out. The end came as I knew it would in Paris. It was the final leg of their grand tour, their last glorious week of living like royalty. They were staying at the George V, one of the most expensive and most exclusive hotels in the world, a place where the bill for a single night could rival a down payment on a small house. The email from Marcus arrived in my inbox on a Tuesday morning. It was simple, direct, and the most beautiful thing I had ever read. Subject: the card. Body: it has been declined. The trap, so patiently and so quietly set, had finally and spectacularly sprung. I sat at my desk in my quiet, sun-drenched office, and I allowed myself a slow, deep, and profoundly satisfying smile. The show was about to begin. I did not have to wait long. My phone rang less than an hour later. The caller ID was an international number, a string of digits that I knew with a deep and almost giddy certainty was originating from the lobby of a very expensive and very panicked hotel in Paris. I let it ring 3 times, a small, petty and deeply enjoyable act of control. And then I answered. The voice on the other end was not the calm, sophisticated voice of my social climbing daughter. It was a high-pitched, frantic and deeply unattractive shriek. She screamed, her voice a raw, naked nerve of pure, unadulterated panic. Oh my God, it's a disaster. You have to help me. I said nothing. I just listened, my expression a mask of calm maternal concern. The card, she shrieked, her voice cracking with a mixture of rage and terror. They're saying it's declined. I'm here at the front desk of the hotel and they won't let us check out. They're saying we have to pay the bill and it's huge. It's so embarrassing, Mom. Everyone is staring. Did you forget to pay the bill? You have to call the credit card company. You have to fix this. Please, Mom, fix it quickly. Her words were a torrent of pure, uncut and breathtaking entitlement. There was no apology. There was no remorse. There was no acknowledgement of her own monstrous behavior. There was only the absolute, unshakable conviction that this was my problem to solve, that her comfort, her convenience, her social standing, was my responsibility. She was not a daughter asking for help. She was a queen stranded in a foreign land, demanding that her royal treasury be immediately replenished. I let her frantic, entitled and deeply satisfying rant come to an end. I let the silence stretch, a long, beautiful and terrible wire, pulled taut across the vast expanse of the Atlantic Ocean. I could hear her ragged, panicked breathing on the other end of the line. I could hear the faint, polite murmur of the hotel lobby in the background. I could almost feel her humiliation, her terror, her dawning, horrified understanding that the magic money tree she had been shaking for her entire adult life had suddenly, and without warning, withered and died. And then, when the silence had become so loud, so heavy, that it was almost unbearable, I finally spoke. My voice was not the voice of the warm, loving, and endlessly forgiving mother she had always known. It was a new voice, a voice she had never heard from me before. It was a voice that was as calm, as cold, and as clear as ice. The dinner, I said, my voice a quiet, simple, and devastating question, was for close family, wasn't it, Jasmine? There was a stunned, choked silence on the other end of the line. Well, I continued, my voice a soft, lethal whisper, so are my credit cards. I paused, letting the beautiful, perfect, and inescapable logic of my words sink in. And then I delivered the final, fatal blow, the words that I had been waiting a month to say. Didn't I warn you? And then with a calm, steady hand I hung up the phone. The aftermath was a quiet and deeply satisfying implosion. I did not have to lift another finger. The consequences, the beautiful, logical, and entirely self-inflicted consequences of my daughter's actions, took care of everything. Jasmine and Evan were, for all intents and purposes, stranded in Paris. The massive hotel bill, a sum that was well into the 5 figures, was their responsibility. The hotel, a deeply unsentimental and efficient French institution, was not interested in their excuses. They were, I heard later through my sister Karen, forced to make a series of deeply humiliating phone calls. Their first call, of course, was to the Sterlings. They called Isabel their powerful, wealthy, and very, very close family, and they begged for a bailout. Isabel's reaction was, from what I can gather, a masterclass in old money disdain. She was horrified not by their predicament, but by the sheer vulgar messiness of it all. The Sterlings did not have credit card dramas in the lobbies of Parisian hotels. It was unseemly. It was common. It was, in a word, tacky. She agreed, with a sigh of profound maternal disappointment, to wire them the money to settle the bill and to fly home in economy class. It was not a rescue. It was a punishment. Their marriage, which had begun with such a grand, triumphant, and socially strategic bang, started its slow, inexorable decline in the cramped, uncomfortable seats of that transatlantic flight. They arrived home not as the conquering heroes of their own fairy tale, but as 2 shamed, indebted, and deeply resentful children who had been sent to their room without supper. The debt from the honeymoon was now theirs, a massive, suffocating anchor that the Sterlings made it very clear they were expected to repay. Jasmine's dream of a life of effortless, inherited luxury was replaced by the grim, grinding reality of a monthly payment plan to her new mother-in-law. Her relationship with Isabel, which she had sacrificed her own mother to obtain, was now tainted by the stench of financial failure. She was no longer the prized, beautiful new addition to the family. She was a liability, a disappointment, a bad investment. As for me, I was free. The cancellation of Jasmine's credit card, the severing of that final toxic financial tie, was a liberation. I took the money, the vast, significant sums of money that I had been pouring into the black hole of my daughter's entitlement for years, and I decided to invest it in a new and far more worthy cause. I invested it in myself and in the community that had always supported me. I established the Genesis Grant, a foundation dedicated to providing startup funding and mentorship to women in my community who, like me, had a dream of starting their own business. I used the profits from my empire, an empire built on the strength and loyalty of women, to empower a new generation of female entrepreneurs. It was the most satisfying, most meaningful work of my life. I was no longer just building salons, I was building futures. I never saw Jasmine again. She never called. She never apologized. She simply and quietly disappeared into the cold, unforgiving world she had chosen for herself. And I found, to my own surprise, that I did not miss her. The pain of her betrayal had been replaced by the profound and deeply satisfying peace of my own self-respect. The story ends not with a confrontation but with a quiet, simple moment of closure. About a year after the wedding, I was at a charity luncheon, an event celebrating the first recipient of the Genesis Grant, a brilliant young woman who had opened a thriving graphic design firm. I was sitting at my table surrounded by my friends, my sister, my real family, and I felt a sense of joy, of purpose, that was so profound it was almost overwhelming. Across the room I saw her. Isabel Sterling. She was sitting at her own table, surrounded by her own equally formidable friends. Our eyes met for a brief, electric moment. There was no animosity in her gaze, no triumph. There was only a flicker of something I had never seen from her before. A cool, appraising, and deeply, deeply grudging respect. She raised her champagne glass, a small, almost imperceptible nod in my direction. And I, Sarah Jenkins, the woman who had built an empire with a pair of scissors and a dream, the woman who had been dismissed as a common tradeswoman, simply smiled and raised my own glass in return. The books were balanced. The accounts were closed. And I had, in the end, won.